All right, here we go. Hi, everyone. This is Achyut Bhava from Nightlight Astrology. Today, we are going to take a look at the major astrological transits of 2021. There's going to be two parts to this series. We're going to do part one today, and we'll do part one tomorrow. First, I want to just start by saying Happy New Year, everybody. 2020 was pretty intense. It was a pretty intense year. So I hope that you're doing well, and that you have some time to be able to hopefully take off or rest, relax, reflect, enjoy. I find that it's really helpful to take a little bit of time, not only to immediately anticipate what's ahead, but to reflect a little bit on what's already come in the past year. So every New Year's Eve, my wife and I, we sit down, and after the kids are in bed, and we just reflect on all of our memories and all of the things we learned and went through in the last year. And then usually on New Year's Day, we'll take some more time and talk about kind of what our intentions are for the year. I'm not a big resolution setter. I believe that, it's better to be consistent than once a year to try to, I don't know, overturn a bunch of bad habits or something. So I just try to chip away at things all the time, but setting a few intentions for the year ahead is important. And today, what we're going to do is take a look at the year ahead, but I encourage you to spend some time reflecting on 2020 and what you learned and how you grew. I have a lot to go through today and tomorrow, but before I get into that, I want to share with all of you a couple of things. One is that there are just 46 hours left to go in my annual Kickstarter. We have received the support of 1,152 backers at the time of making this, which is that's crazy. That's I don't know what to say. Thank you, everybody. I really, really appreciate it. We're going to put all of this to really good use. Some of the things that I'm able to do because of your support are support a staff of 3 people, support my family, and also build really cool things. So one of the things that we're going to be building, it's very possible that we could, if we, depending on how the next 48 hours goes, it's possible that we could have the donation-based reading clinic open in 2022, which would be a place where have a staff of readers that get the chance to build experience reading charts, because when you're new and you're excited to do astrology, it's really hard to get experience out there just reading a lot of charts. So some of my best students, I want to have an opportunity where they can make a little bit of money and get some experience, and people out there who can't afford a normal reading can receive like a donation based or sliding scale of some kind rate that's affordable. So that's what we're going to try to build, and it's very possible that we'll get there in 2022. So, and that's thanks to all of you. I have to, obviously, there's a few people I'll have to hire to help me build that, and that'll take a lot of work. But that to me couldn't be a better investment of my time and energy. The truth is that I firmly believe that as an astrologer, if you do well, if your business does well, and you are at all a spiritually centered person, then you should think about a good amount of your success going back into building the integrity of your legacy for your students, your community, and for the greater field itself. So that's what I'm going to do with this success. It's not my success, it's our success, and it's a success that should help other people and improve the quality of astrology in general. So that's what I'm going to try to do, and I'm really humbled and thankful for all of your support. You have 46 hours left to go, and when you pitch in, you can receive some really cool rewards. I'm going to put these into the live chat right now. There's the link to the Kickstarter in the live chat. It'll be in the description of this video. It will be in the comment section of this video. you can receive 50% off all of my programs in 2022, my advanced courses, my year one class. They're 50% off for 46 more hours. So take advantage of that. But the other thing that I want to show you, I'm just so proud of this, and it's something that my staff made, particularly Delia and Denise. I want to give them some shout outs for making these. If you donate, there are 2 rewards you can get that are maybe 2 of the most popular that I offer. One is a video called The Astrology of 2021. And this video is a deep dive into the transits of the year ahead. We're just going to be looking at a few big ones in this video and tomorrow. Specifically in this video, we're going to be looking at Jupiter, Uranus, and Saturn. And then tomorrow, we're going to take a look at Jupiter changing signs into Pisces and the eclipses. So those are just the macro transits for the year. But in this video, I break down all of them for the year. And I want to show you what comes along with this little reward when you donate. This is a PDF. You can see it here, but I'm going to put it into full screen mode. Let's see if it will. There we go. Oh, here. I need to. Sorry, guys. My screen got frozen. All right, let's try this again. So this is a really cool calendar that my staff made, and it is an accompaniment to the video. Let's see if I can try this again. I'm actually not going to put it in full screen mode just because it seemed to disturb my connection. All right, so when you get the Astrology of 2021 video, when you donate, it comes along with this calendar. And what we've done is we've given you a guide to interpreting the major transits of the year on your own, as well as a video where I unpack those transits. So you have a glyph with all of the meanings of the planets and their keywords. You have a glyph with all the meanings of the aspects and their the meanings of new moons, full moons, lunar and solar eclipses. Little key that tells you how to combine that information, and some recommended journaling practices that can teach you how to track the transits on your own. And then this contains, you'll see a calendar. And the calendar is going to show you all of the major transits that I cover in my year ahead, plus some that I don't, and dignity changes and like all sorts of really good stuff. And if you take this key along with the keywords and the instructions that we've given you for journaling, you can track your own transits. So that is just an incredible thing that I've always wanted to offer, never had the time to offer, but because I've had some help this past year, Delia and Denise made those, and they're absolutely awesome. Now you can also pick up a sun or rising sign horoscope for the year ahead, 46 more hours to do so. And when you do that through the Kickstarter, when you support my work and you pick this up, you'll get the same exact thing for your rising sign and tracking of your ruling planet for the year. So this is the Libra rising sign calendar that comes with that reward. And the guide to interpretation is the same, and the recommended journaling practices are the same, but in your calendar, you're tracking your ruling planet, Venus, throughout the year by dignity, by house in your birth chart, by aspect. So this is another really incredible way to track the transits. And in addition, you get obviously the video of me breaking down the biggest transits of the year for whatever your sun or rising sign is. So I wanted to share that with you guys so you could just see, because it's a really cool aspect of that reward that I don't think everyone even really knows is there. We haven't really advertised it. It's just kind of like, surprise, here's a really cool bonus. So if you guys are into that, awesome. Finally, like I said, there's half off tuition. So thank you guys very much for letting me take the time in my videos throughout the month. I know that it's like, I'm banging a drum that's probably annoying at times because you've heard me talk about it so much. But if you see how successful we've been, it is also because, we're reaching people and in doing things that we are really good for the larger astrological community, and in trying to build things that are valued by the community of people who watch this channel. and who want to learn astrology and so forth, we've really rallied a ton of support. So I just want to say thank you again to everybody. Now, before we dive into the transits of the day, which I'm really excited about, where are you all coming from? I'm looking in the chat box here, seeing dialing in from Dubai. Amazing. Let's see, from Vienna, from Italy, from the UK. Amazing. Awesome. Boise. Nice. Okay, so we're going to today what we're going to talk about are the transits from Uranus, Jupiter, and Saturn. And I'm going to put the real-time clock up so that you guys can see it. Here we go. So I'm going to take away everything else on the screen but these three planets, and we're just going to get into it. So these three planets right here, if you watched my video that I made with my wife, Ashley, we talked about these energies already a little bit in the Planets and Plants episode for 2021. She gave some really good herbal advice for how to work with these energies. And so I would recommend checking that out as well. But in this video, what we want to talk about is what does it mean that we're going to have just a boatload of aspects between these planets? First of all, let's understand that Jupiter and Saturn are in a whole sign aspect to Uranus all year long. In ancient astrology, there were two types of aspects. There was what is called a whole sign aspect, and there is what is called a degree-based aspect. A whole sign aspect means that the two signs are configured to one another. That's what makes an aspect. Not planets connecting, but signs connecting by virtue of seeing one another through different kinds of shapes built into the zodiac. For example, the way that Aquarius and Taurus see one another is by virtue of the great square from the fixed signs. So Taurus and Aquarius are configured by one side of the great square within the circle. That square is of the nature of Mars, which means that any planets that relate to one another within these signs that are configured by one side of the square will have a kind of Mars-like relationship with one another. Now, that means it can be a little bit difficult, but can also be very productive and action-oriented because that's how Mars is. Now, we also can tell if we were using inferior and superior aspects, which I don't tend to use with outer planets, but Saturn and Jupiter would be in the superior square, which means that they're in an overcoming position, or their influence is going to tend to dominate Uranus. We have a very empowered Saturn this year as well. So you're getting a Uranus-Saturn dynamic that's a little bit more toned by Saturn than by Uranus. That's important, and Saturn is pretty strong right now. But you also have the softening and sort of grace and abundance of Jupiter in the mix, which is nice. That'll tone down the intensity of Saturn a little bit at least. So we have several aspects from these planets in the year ahead. First of all, you're going to see about the middle of January, you're going to see about the 17th, here's Jupiter getting into the square with Uranus. So that's our first one. Then if we take this forward into February, you're going to see Saturn get involved with the square. And let's bring that down to the exact day if we can here. So here is Saturn by February 17th getting into the square with Uranus. Then if we track this forward, the two planets separate a bit, and then we're going to see them come back by June. So on June 17th, we're going to see, I think it's about 17th, 16th, is it? Where is it? Oh, here it is. Right around there. I'm messing this up a little bit, but June 12th, here we go. So it's like about June 14th. There we go. You can see that they're square again. So we've got Jupiter and Uranus in January, Saturn and Uranus in February, Saturn and Uranus again in June. By that time, Jupiter has changed signs. We're going to preview Jupiter's change of signs into Pisces tomorrow. We're going to run it through the 12 houses. And then you go forward to the very end of the year, and we have at the very, very end of the year, you're going to see Saturn coming together with Uranus right about Christmas time. You can see it one more time. So let's recap all together. I'm going to write this on the screen in case people are watching this and want to pause it and sort of write it down. You've got Jupiter, Uranus in January, Saturn, Uranus in February, Saturn, Uranus in June, Saturn, Uranus in December. That's our year. That's like, and this dynamic between these planets are in effect all year due to the whole sign aspect, but then also by degree and those specific months and those specific dates that I just went over, which is when you'll see the archetypal tension between these planets peaking. So now what we need to do is just sort of talk about this combination and what it might look like. This is something that I break down in all of my rising sign videos. I'm not going to go over it in detail for all 12 signs today. I want to talk more broadly about the archetypal combinations. So first of all, you have to remember that you have an archetypal combination that in some ways couldn't be more contrary. Saturn and Uranus. Saturn is going to be a more serious, weighty, and kind of stern quality. It can be a planet that refers to outsiders or outcasts. You guys have heard me talk about this before. Black sheeps, people who are somehow on the outside of the city walls. Remember, Saturn is a very dim, distant planet that can refer to people who are somehow outsiders, heretics, alienated, others. We talked even about aliens, literally, with Saturn in Aquarius. And yet we also have the potential for Saturn to represent almost like a violent adherence to the status quo. Saturn can be the hermit on the mountaintop, and Saturn can sometimes be the face of corporate greed. It's a very diverse planet, and it tends to be the boundary marker between who has and who doesn't. Part of this is also, remember, because Saturn Kronos is the god that is the ruler of the golden age. He has it all. He's in charge of everything. And then eventually becomes usurped by his son Zeus. He's usurped and thrown out of power. So you have that dichotomy built into the mythos of Saturn, the dim, distant one, the dim, distant golden age of the past, right? Or the desire to keep all outsiders away, or the feeling of being an alien other, as well as the feeling of wanting to preserve and control and hold on to something as long as we can, not wanting the golden age to ever be taken away from us. Fathers or parents sometimes don't allow their kids to thrive. They eat their children like Kronos. So these are all Saturn dynamics. Then we have Uranus. Uranus is like the battle cry of the French Revolution or the American Revolution or any other revolution, sometimes bloody, sometimes zealous, filled with a blur between progressivism and tyranny. Rebellions and revolutions are like that. They're messy. And people often will, in America, especially in the West, we're all rugged individualism. I don't care about authority, like down with the hierarchy, down with the man. And ironically, we're, of course, the country that often embodies those very qualities that we like to resist as a collective persona. So Uranus is interesting in that it can represent revolution, and it can also represent the resistance to authority that's pathological and narcissistic. And there's a fine line between that, and we can all get taken by Uranus in ways that are truly revolutionary, representing true breakthroughs, emancipation, freedom, sudden, shocking, disruptive changes that cut the chains off from our feet, and that's Uranus. On the other hand, Uranus can represent the reckless, narcissistic ideologue who is anyone who's different than me or who doesn't believe what I believe is evil. They're against progress. And you can see this as an embodied energy, a kind of manic political quality throughout history in all places in the world, in all countries. It's archetypal. It's something that we all go through, we all experience. We can experience it within schools or within religious or community organizations. We can experience it within our own family. There is a kind of rebel without a cause in Uranus somewhere, and then there's a rebel with a real cause. And it can get really wishy-washy. You don't always know which is which. So now imagine now we're taking both of those qualities and we're saying, okay, the two of you are going to conflict, and there's going to be a combative quality between the two of you all year. And it's going to peak in February, June, and December, but all year, that's it. So it's like, wow, what does that mean? How can we see that show up? Well, we're going to unpack that in a minute, but let's now talk about the fact that Jupiter is also in the mix. Now, Jupiter's going to show up really big in January, and then it sort of cools off with its aspect to Uranus throughout the year. It never comes back as close as that pass in January, but it's active all year. Jupiter Uranus, on the other hand, is you take all those revolutionary qualities and you basically just give them steroids. You're just kind of saying, let's make it all a lot bigger. Let's make it all a lot grander. The grandiosity of rebellion, on the one hand, the rapid, sudden, big, progressive change, vision, the rapid, unimaginably successful, popular, meteoric rise of something, breaking records that have always been held. That Jupiter Uranus is like, it's like, it's like it's like if there's a revolutionary war, then the Jupiter Uranus moment of that revolutionary war is like the grand finale. It's when all of the fireworks are going off, and so you're taking the Uranian qualities and you're expanding them and amplifying them, and also adding in the potential for good luck and grace. Remember that Uranus can be a signifier of sudden disruptive energies that are very violent. Like I've talked a lot about how this year I think there's going to be some serious earthquakes this year. I think we're going to see some in the next few months even. But my reason for saying that is because when powerful planets like Saturn and Jupiter come into contact with Uranus, that sudden, totally disruptive and potentially destructive, somewhat accident-prone Uranus comes around. You can see some things, like it's like the Tower card. Things happen really rapidly, and everything changes really dramatically, in some ways striking down old structures. So the nice thing about Jupiter in the mix is that Jupiter is like the near miss. I've heard it described that way a few times before, and it always really resonated. Jupiter is your 15-year-old kid has got their license and they're driving over the speed limit, and the officer pulls them over and gives them a warning, or they avoid a head-on collision by a few feet. And it's that feeling of that could have been really bad, but somehow we were saved from the worst. Because Jupiter also has this way of keeping order. Jupiter Zeus is the original cosmocrat in the ancient symbolism of the planets. Zeus Jupiter is the one that creates some semblance of cosmic unity and togetherness and harmony, not in the Venusian sense, but in the sense that there's an intelligible law behind everything, and it's graceful and it's good and it's trustworthy and so forth, and it's just. And so you will see justice being served in very striking and sudden and sometimes shocking ways in the year ahead. But you're also going to see that sense of grace, that near miss, that being sort of, saved in a way that we maybe didn't deserve to be, right? So that's Jupiter in the mix of the year. the Saturn Uranus qualities can be demonstrated really well when you look at the charts. We're going to bounce back to Saturn Uranus now. When you look at the charts of certain world figures, there's a variety of really interesting expressions of Saturn Uranus people who have close contacts between Saturn and Uranus in their charts. And I looked at squares and oppositions because the trines and sextiles tend to be really a lot more harmonious. And we're looking at a square right now. So you really need to look at oppositions or squares in people's charts to get a feeling for how that archetypal combination is going to show up. You have people whose lives are suddenly transformed by shocking or dramatic events, and sometimes very devastating. Christopher Reeve, who played Superman, was thrown from a horse and broke his neck and was paralyzed. He was born with a very close configuration between Saturn and Uranus. The Saturn obviously rules the bones, and Uranus is the sudden shocking disruption. So you have that kind of that bone-breaking accident. But he also described it as one of the most liberating events of his life, because although his physical form was shattered, his mental, emotional, and spiritual consciousness woke up in this tremendous way. But that is not the way that we typically want to be woken up. And that's how he described it too, was that at first he wanted to die because the accident obviously took away everything. He was a quadriplegic. But he found newer, deeper, more meaningful things to live for because of this sudden, kind of devastating event. So that's a Saturn-Uranus combination. And I know that it's uncomfortable to talk about, and it's going to make people a little bit afraid. Usually, it's not going to, how many people are going to go through some absolutely tragic, devastating event like that this year? Very few. But it's to illustrate the kind of revolution or liberation that can happen where structure is suddenly dismantled. And structures resist, that's why they're a structure. They resist the change really well. The weather comes, the house stands. The weather comes, the house stands. Then a lightning strike comes and it's powerful enough to take down a structure. You see what I mean? So you have to watch for that this year. Christopher Reeve is a pretty good example. There's some other examples of people that embody different aspects of Saturn Uranus, like General Patton, right? You're talking about basically a crazy, rebellious military strategist. So that's Saturn Uranus. How about Hulk Hogan? Just think about him. He's like a combination of like steroids, Mountain Dew, and like, tank tops being ripped open. So you have like, you can imagine like the tough guy who's like hard and rebellious, a hard Hulk Hogan biker type who will destroy you. That's very Saturn Uranus. Or you have someone who's sort of crude and hard and tough and really funny and rebellious and quirky. Roseanne Barr, Saturn Uranus. I'm just giving you combinations. I'm not necessarily saying that I find her really funny because I've never even really watched her or her show or anything. You have people who want to create major breakthroughs in our understanding of the world, of science. People who are lawbreakers in the most revolutionary ways, sometimes very esoteric and sort of otherworldly. Uranus can actually pertain to the study of astrology, astronomy, esoteric sciences. Stanislav Grof, pioneer of holotropic breathwork research, LSD researcher, true revolutionary in breaking all sorts of barriers and boundaries. And actually, one of the major therapeutic analogies that he came up with in the LSD setting had to do with the stages of birth and the constriction and breakthrough that we experience in the birth canal as a sort of analogy for breakthroughs in psychic and spiritual life. That's Saturn Uranus. Courtney Love. How about Courtney Love? She's, this angsty, hardcore rebel figure. And you also have people like Billy Graham. I know that for a lot of people are going to be like, yuck, Billy Graham, I don't, but for
for within the Christian world, Billy Graham was a revolutionary. And he faced, I know it's not, might be not your world, might not be my world, but he faced a lot of institutional pushback for a lot of the things that he chose to do, being this sort of revolutionary evangelist. Rudolf Steiner is another great example of Saturn Uranus, where you can have these just deep, systematic, like scientists who create these amazing structures of mind and thought that are really outside of the box and sometimes deeply esoteric. Rudolf Steiner, there's others like him too. You have figures who come to be associated with the with rebellious movements or things in life, like for example, and rebellious, or what do I want to say, protests, things like that, activism. Rodney King comes to mind. Now, Rodney King is, of course, brutally beaten by, these kind of rebellious cops. They aren't following the rules. They're not doing what they're supposed to do. They break out of the rules, and they have this kind of authoritarian, I'll do whatever I want and I'll beat this man mercilessly because I don't, they pulled him over and they didn't like what he was doing. And so they almost took his life. And then the LA riots ensued, right? But Rodney King, right? He's like an embodiment in some ways of that tower card energy, where you have this complete, it's just, I don't even know what more to say. It's just such a Saturn Uranus dynamic with him. Another person that's associated with that on the negative side, because Rodney King in some ways becomes a kind of martyr for a larger movement. I'm not intentionally, obviously, but he becomes emblematic of this challenge to the establishment of law enforcement in Los Angeles. And this, by the way, happened when Saturn was last in Aquarius too. Harvey Weinstein, who his reckless defiance of proper etiquette and responsibility, and the proper way to interact with women and people that he worked with and so forth. He's this I can do whatever I want, I'm above the law type of personality, and he becomes instrumental to sparking the Me Too movement, right? So it's not always that the person themselves is like a good, healthy version of rebel. They can be a rule breaker that in some ways sparks some kind of backlash or something like that too. So you can kind of go in both ways. Another spiritual scientist type that comes to mind, real esoteric and out there, presents whole worlds of, reality that they either dream up or that they somehow are gifted to see. David Icke, you guys know him. I'm not really into him, but is another one that was on the list. And then of course you have the classic sort of rebel meets authoritarian, or someone who tends to take the rules and laws into their own hand, do whatever they want, and they gain a lot of power and authority through it. Vladimir Putin, that's a Saturn Uranus dynamic. So I thought that it would be interesting to also go back in time and look at Saturn Uranus in history. And specifically, I thought, wonder what was happening the last time that Saturn was in Aquarius and Uranus was in Taurus. I had to go back to 1521 and 1522, specifically 1522. And there were some really interesting things that I found. One is that Costa Rica was discovered by the Spanish and was called Costa Rica when it was found to have a lot of gold. Now, why is that interesting? Because that was one of a number of very instrumental moments that would start speeding up and fueling the fire of sort of Western colonialist expansion, a lot of which represents an expanding or breaking of boundaries. There's a lot of other things that are happening similarly, like there's the first ship to circumnavigate the world around at that same year. So breaking of boundaries, expanding and exploring. But then there's also that really kind of evil dynamic of killing other people in the name of your expansion, exploration, etc. So there's these revolutionary qualities that are paired sometimes with this I'm above the law, I can do whatever I want. I can expand in any direction I want, break any barrier or boundary that I want, and I don't really care who I step on in the process. Like for real. And think also about some of the things, and I know that I'm not saying that any real nation on earth has ever been exempt from some of these behaviors. So I'm not trying to target anyone or anything here, but think, for example, about what some of the things that Vladimir Putin has done over the years. Even if you go back to some of the last Saturn Uranus dynamics that we've had, interestingly enough, um, kind of invading other countries, moving towards taking spaces in other countries, and not caring if it goes against the country's sovereignty or their laws. So that disregard for other people's boundaries, Saturn Uranus can be like that, total disregard for boundaries in this way that's like very zealous and ironically like fundamentalist, like rigid rejection of boundaries. Isn't that funny that there can be, and you've probably met people like this, right? Where they're so, it's like, how can I say it? No offense to vegans, because my family is basically vegan. We're in the Bhakti tradition. We use some ghee and milk and things like that, but all, humanely, coming in a humane way. But if you ever sat down and had dinner with like a militant vegan before, and I always joke about this because I in the yoga world, like I've been with a lot of people who are like vegetarians and vegans. Like you can always tell the difference. Like I have a lot of really nice friends who are vegans, so no offense to any vegans out there, but like you sit down with a militant vegan and you're just like, oh my God, great, here we go. Right? They're going to try to assault me with their virtue, like while I'm, trying to eat my hummus or whatever. So the point is that there can be this way where the dogma of whatever we think is progressive or righteous can become really intense. And that's not just on the left. Like obviously I'm just picking on something that's sort of in my sphere of activity, but like you could see the same thing happening within, people who are in a completely different political or cultural orientation. It's the same quality somewhere else. Luther translated the New Testament into German. That represented this boundary breaking moment for the Bible. But similarly, at that same time, he was excommunicated from the Catholic Church as a heretic after his nailing of the theses to the door of the Catholic Church and his protesting. So the Reformation, that actually is something that was happening as we had Uranus in Taurus and Saturn in Aquarius. Now, if you go back to the gold hype and some of that was associated with some of the exploration that was going on, or the naming of Costa Rica and stuff like that, I get the feeling that this year could also get people really in a fever, like fevery and manic about money, especially like Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. I will only say this because I'm not an expert, but I will only say this. It doesn't matter how progressive or innovative or, like healthy or intelligent this new form of currency is. If we're captured by it with the same greed or lust that we've always been captured by gold and precious metals and everything else, then the result won't be any different. It may take a while, but we should be very careful not to be seduced by getting rich through something that, it could very well be, this is just my 2 cents, could very well be a wolf in sheep's clothing. Just be careful about getting high on trying to make a ton of money. And I think that the cryptocurrency thing is really interesting. I don't know a lot about it, but what I will say is that I have seen a crazy amount of greed around it that is no different than any other kind of greed. And I personally think we just need to be thoughtful about that. But there could be very, very well be another kind of boundary, especially because Uranus is in Taurus. a sign that's very earthy and connected to very earthy, sensual things. Taurus is not really inherently a sign that's about money, but when you think about resources in life and what helps us to develop a feeling of fecundity or virility or kind of potency and stability in life in an earthy way, a lot of that's going to come down to how much you have or what you own or what you possess. And for those reasons, sometimes money is associated with Taurus. When you have Uranus, that inventive energy in Taurus, you can see developments around money and finances and markets, and some of them are going to be interesting and truly innovative. And I'm not saying that the cryptocurrency thing might not be a part of that, but with Saturn in the mix, the old miser, the old Scrooge that can come in and it's like just don't be too seduced by that, because greed is greed is greed. That's all I'll say about it. And I'll let people, and so I don't mean to sound like pedantic there or anything, but okay. There was also the most destructive earthquake in Spanish history, according to Wikipedia, that happened as the two planets were getting together, and another major earthquake that happened called the Villafranca earthquake. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but that was just Wikipedia things that I found. Two very devastating earthquakes that came together right as the two planets were moving into their degree-based square at the end of 1522, if I have that right. So I thought you guys would find that interesting. Now, let me show you some of the differences between the Saturn-Uranus energy and Saturn or Jupiter and Uranus. When you get Jupiter and Uranus together, you get this, like, again, like you get a so much more like noble and sort of good looking, and it's Saturn Uranus is like edgy and like hard. It's kind of like punk or emo or something. When you get Jupiter together, it's like stately and regal. It's like the stuff of emperors and empresses, and it has that feeling of like lofty and orderly and good and expansive and abundant. Here's some people who have that Jupiter Uranus energy where there's a rebellion, but it's colored by that sort of big goodness of Jupiter. John F. Kennedy, that's a good one. Another one is Robin Williams. If you can think about the way in which he was such a trickster rebel, but had that kind of upbeat, optimistic, lovable personality, very Jupiter Uranus. You also have, there's people who are really rebellious and they have this kind of like, I go over the top with everything rebel, and it's just really big and blown out and sort of glamorous, like Lindsay Lohan or James Dean. I thought those were pretty good examples. Rafael Nadal, who's just like this sensation of a tennis player. Warren Buffett, also the big, everything about Warren Buffett. And that goes back to the whole thing about greed with Jupiter Uranus too, is it's like, what are you doing? Are you going to be a philanthropist? Jupiter Uranus can be really philanthropical. So it can be very good spirited. It can be very generous. You will see great acts of charity, or, for example, it was a Jupiter Uranus dynamic that came through when we built and expanded our donation based yoga studio. Jupiter Uranus is coming, and it's going to be that Jupiter is in my 10th house, and I'm going to be building this donation based reading clinic. So the idea of like doing something that's good, that's Jupiter, right? That's benefits other humans, that's progressive or outside of the box or rebellious in some way or innovative or original. And of course, Warren Buffett has done that kind of thing in his life too. Or you have Shia LaBeouf, right? There's another character who's very like, you get the glam of Jupiter and the originality and quirkiness of Uranus. And there's some other things in his chart that are a little heavier too. But just to give you some images here to work with. Moving through others, let's see. Okay, so you have the charisma as well as the originality, and sometimes that can be a little bit dark. Like you have Jim Jones, famous cult leader, Jupiter Uranus. I went through some of that in my 4-part series on the Great Conjunction as well. George Orwell, famous, obviously, sort of sci-fi, post-apocalyptic writer, Jupiter Uranus. Amazing figures in science fiction and fantasy, where Jupiter Uranus is also going to represent these great moments of sort of cultural, imaginative expansion, going beyond the new horizon. Mark Hamill, who played Luke Skywalker, arguably the most famous thing that he did with his life, the most life-changing thing that he did, was to play a character called Luke Skywalker, who was a Jedi in a movie called A New Hope. Jupiter Uranus. How about this one? You also have William Shatner, who plays what's his name? Captain Kirk, right? And to boldly go where no man has gone before. Star Trek, right? Obviously, that is the defining role of his life. And here he is with a Jupiter Uranus dynamic in his chart, Jupiter Uranus square. So you're also going to see some of that like cultural, imaginative, sci-fi, esoteric science, and the expansion of those themes in really powerful ways. I honestly think it's going to be a very good year for astrologers. I think that this is a great year for people to invest in their interests in esoteric sciences in general. I'm not just saying, like, in my 10-year career of full-time astrology, I don't think I've ever said that before, but it's just true. When I look at the most important moments of my life when it comes to my own development of astrology, divination, the I Ching, tarot, any of these kinds of things, yoga, there's usually Jupiter Uranus contact in my transits, in my birth chart, or in the sky. And maybe I'll do another video sometimes and walk you through and show you, but Jupiter Uranus is a great combination for expanding your mind and your interests in far-reaching, otherworldly subject matters. It's the professor Jupiter hits the sky god, right? So it's like, if you want knowledge of the starry heavens above and within, and you're also going to see, I think, some advancements in things like psychedelic research in the next year. I wouldn't be surprised to see that. But now, when you combine all of that, you can get this real push-pull dynamic where it's like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. You got the expansion, the imagination, the revolution, and then you have this kind of conservative, potentially more authoritarian, punk, sort of edgy, and more constrictive quality that's toning that Uranus and saying, like, so it's what a year it's going to be. I mean, I think I'm more excited about this year than I was 2020 at the outset, right? I didn't know what was coming in 2020. But the reason that I'm more excited about this year, well, obviously just putting this year behind us will feel good. I think it was a tough year. I think it was the best year of my life in some ways because I learned more and grew more as a person. Like a year ago, I received initiation, my name change, go into the winter. We had the Saturn Pluto panel in January, and then boom, like everything completely blew up, COVID and so forth. But I learned a lot in this past year. In fact, I took time to reflect on the 10 things that I've learned in doing so many charts over 10 years. And that series, doing that series, reflecting and coming up with those insights, that was life-changing for me. And so was moving back home to my home state of Minnesota. And that was spurred on by so many challenges that had come up that it helped crystallize some insights. So I think 2020 has been great, but last year I was feeling like 2020 is going to be heavy as hell. And then at the very end, when Jupiter and Uranus enter Aquarius, the mood and energy is going to be totally different. We're going to be turning a corner, and that feeling of hope returning is going to be there. But now when I look at 2021, even though I feel generally more optimistic about 2021, I'm also like, there's going to be this back and forth between the conservative and the contractive and the more liberal and expansive qualities. And both of them are going to be having that revolutionary zeal of Uranus imbued within them, Jupiter and Saturn. So that's it. What can you say? It's going to be a heck of a year. Another thing that happened, by the way, just I forgot to mention this, but in 1522, there was also this famous revolution called the Knights' Revolt. I'll just read you the little section here. It was a revolt by a number of Protestant and religious humanist German knights led by Franz von Sickingen against the Roman Catholic Church and the Holy Roman Emperor. It has also been called the Poor Barons' Rebellion. It was short-lived, but would inspire the bloody German Peasants' War of 1524 to 1526. Why do I mention that? Not because I know really anything about that historical event, but because I feel that event is so indicative of what can happen not just this year, but in the next few years to come. That these events can trigger things that have long-lasting effects. And that's also why a great conjunction is so important, because you're talking about an era that's going to span about 20 years, or macrocosmic view, 200 years with all of the air sign great conjunctions. So when you see these energies coming together, it's like, it's not just what it's going to do right now, but it's how it affects the next years down the road. For example, remember in 2023, Pluto's going to come into Aquarius. It'll be then kind of reactivating some of these same trigger points that we're going to be visiting in this year. So I got a bunch of emails from people being like, can you tell me when the earthquakes are going to hit? I'll tell you right now, I have no idea. My guess is that it will be within a 3 to 4 degree range of Saturn and Uranus in particular, which would be like February, and then maybe like May into June, maybe even July, and then maybe right around the end of the year. That's a guess. I'm not a natural. I don't go looking for natural disasters. You know what I mean? Like, that's not a part of my practice. But if I see transits that are widely known for, you know, the unleashing of very powerful forces of nature, like, I'll talk about it. I talked about it last year with Saturn and Pluto. I said one of the things that can happen with Saturn and Pluto are really, really powerful natural disasters. We had unbelievable wildfires across the planet over this past year. And we also, of course, had a natural, natural, but we had a pandemic, right? So that sense of just dealing with our own biology, and whether it came from nature or a lab, I have no desire to get into with anybody. But it doesn't matter to me. It was a force that was unleashed that made us dealing with. It was like, hazmat bio suits or whatever were like, and masks were a big part of the year. And that's just those forces of nature that. And I talked about Pan. I talked about Pan and panic and the forces of nature and how they bring us back to our senses, right? So if I see it, I'm going to talk about it, but I don't do it because I want to scare people. It's just like, this is the karmic world we're living in. If people aren't fully aware of the reality of suffering, of impermanence, of death, of uncertainty or mystery, and if people aren't squaring up every day to being like, anything could happen at any time that could devastate my little framework of security, well, we haven't really taken a spiritual step if we're not living in that way. It doesn't mean we have to live with dread and doom and fear and anxiety, but there's a sacred fear and trembling that comes with understanding how tentative and vulnerable and fragile our situations are in life. It helps us to appreciate each other. It helps us to live lighter and more free from the heart, connecting to the source within all things, saying yes to our experiences. I see realism about the darker forces in life as something that puts us in our heart, not in anxiety. But it takes a kind of shift of perception to see things that way. And I know that it can be, talking about these things, these forces of nature, can be really challenging for some people. So, but please don't email me asking me, if something devastating is going to happen in your city or country, because I have no idea, right? I have no clue. I just know that the combination of these planets can very much rattle foundations and suddenly disrupt structures. And you will see a history, as I just showed you. The last time that these two planets were configured in these signs, we had several major earthquakes. So there's earthquakes every year. There's The plates are always moving, but sometimes there's just moments karmically where bigger structures are ready to change. Again, the good news is that Jupiter in the mix of all of this is really graceful and has that feeling of, the near miss or the close call. And there's going to be a lot of, there's a big safety net built into this year, I believe, that will be there for us, and we need to trust in that as well. Okay, so I see some comments in the comment section. I really appreciate all of you guys hanging out and sharing your thoughts. That's what I've got for today. Tomorrow, on New Year's Day, we'll be back for one final talk on 2021's macro astrological transits. We're talking about Jupiter's brief change into Pisces and the eclipses for the year. So stay tuned for that tomorrow. I want to remind you all that we have 45 hours left to go in the annual Kickstarter. Still a chance to pick up your deep dive into the astrology of 2021 or your full-on detailed horoscope for 2021 for your sun or rising sign. There's the link in the live stream. Remember, in case you missed it at the beginning, we actually put together these really beautiful little bonus calendars. So let me just show you what those look like one last time. So here is one for Libra that I have ready to show you. So if you pick up, when you donate to my Kickstarter, support this channel in 2021, you can pick up your 2021 recording for your sun or rising sign, and it comes with a calendar. There's a key showing you how to use all the planets and aspects, new moons, full moons, lunar and solar eclipses, examples about how to blend or combine the planets in the key, as well as some recommended journaling practices, and then a calendar that literally shows you when all of the major aspects are going to happen to the ruling planet of your sun or rising sign. If you're a Libra, it's Venus. If you're Cancer, it's the moon, and so forth. The other thing that we have for the astrology of 2021, it's really cool, is the same basic thing, but it's for the whole year. You're going to see me dive into month-by-month breakdown of the major transits of 2021. And then you have a key. If you donate, you get this really cool PDF. You got a key with all the planets and keywords, all the aspects, new full moons, etc. An example of how to blend and combine them, and how to create a journaling practice so that you can track and predict transits. And the benefit of doing this, and then there's your calendar taking you through all the major transits of the year. The benefit of doing something like this is that the more that you can pair you get astrology from me, right? But I'm just one dude. I've got some ideas, I've got some experience. You want to take this at some point, if you really like this and you're tuning into it, you want to start developing your ability to track the transits on your own. I don't think that any of us can do this in a vacuum, right? You can't be the only authority. You have to get input from other astrologers, from other people. It has to be part of a conversation because we're all sharing in this weather together. You never see a weatherman go to school and be like, well, I've got my take on the weather. I'm always right. I'm not going to hear what any other meteorologists have to say or what the meteorological community is saying. But how do you develop that communion between your own insights and the guidance of reputable astrologers that you like? And I think one of the ways is to learn how to track transits. So that's what we tried to create for you in these rewards. I hope you get some use out of them. All right, that's what I've got for today. I really, again, just hope you guys have a really nice new year. I feel so fortunate to just spend time with all of you wonderful people all year round. And I look forward to another year ahead. I promise you with all my heart, I'll give it my best. I'll give it my best to make sure that this is a place where we look at astrology, but we look at it for the right reason, which means we look at astrology in order to feed the life and existence of our divine spirit souls, who are never defined by any of the ups and downs of the astrology, who study this in order to stay in our hearts, to stay our best, most loving, compassionate selves. So that's my promise to all of you for the year ahead. And thank you all for just a really wonderful year. All right. Well, we will stop here.